Hello, everyone, and welcome to another program here at the Walters Art Museum. My name is Joy Davis, and I am the manager of adult and community programs here at the Walters. I'm very excited today. We have a very exciting group with us. It's Greg Bailey and Jenn Harr. Greg Bailey is the Senior Objects Conservator here at the Walters, and Jenn Harr is the Head of Collections Management at the Walters. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to hop right into questions and right into the slides. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. And so my first question is, what are your roles at the Walters Art Museum, and what is the makeup of the collection?
Hi, I'm Jenn Harr. I'm Head of Collections Management at the Walters Art Museum. My role is really, sometimes we're called collections managers, sometimes we're called registrars. There's collection specialists out there and probably a number of other versions of titles. We're really, what it means is that we're responsible for the physical care and storage and management of all of the works of art in the Walters collection, and very importantly, their associated documentation. We have also another wide array of responsibilities, including inventory, housing for each object. We also handle exhibition logistics, so shipping, packing, insurance, and display requirements for when objects are displayed at home or in other institutions across the world.
Okay.
That's rad.
Yeah. So that covers a lot, clearly. Hi, I'm Greg Bailey. I'm one of the conservators at the Walters Art Museum, and I'm very happy to be part of a staff of 9 people in conservation who help to care for the individual objects. So while Jenn looks at the collection across broad categories, I and my immediate colleagues in the Objects Conservation Department are really tasked with caring for the 3-dimensional artworks in the Walters, which covers all sorts of different materials from all around the world. And conservation, sort of more in very general terms, encompasses several different activities, which include preservation, so doing the best that we can to prevent deterioration or damage of the collections, either within the museum, on display, or when they travel. Conservation, which is either consolidating damages or halting or slowing down deterioration processes. And then what you might think of as more traditional restoration work. So retouching losses, making new pieces, really intervening on the surface of artworks. We also are very fortunate within the Walters to have a scientific research department. So we are assisted by Dr. Glenn Gates in material analysis as well, to answer questions such as, what is it made out of, how is it made, and how has it changed over time? And those can sound like very straightforward questions, but often turn out to be very complicated with complex artworks. So we wind up working with not only the registrars and collections care department, but many different departments across really across the Walters. Jenn, do you have some broader responsibilities within your field?
Yeah, so I almost forgot to mention that I am part of an association that's called ARCS for short. It's the Association of Registrars and Collection Specialists. And so we have a code of ethics that is separate from also my professional position at the Walters, where we have certain standards that we hold ourselves to in terms of caring for objects and the documentation that's required when you're shipping objects to and from. You know, there's a lot of laws in various countries and ways in which that we want to treat art objects no matter where they're coming from.
And I'm also part of a broader professional organization called the American Institute for Conservation, AIC. You can find them online at culturalheritage.org. And we also have, beyond paying our dues, which they ask for every year, really the only requirement for being a part of AIC is pledging to uphold our own code of ethics, And we really take that to heart because, as you can imagine, it's an enormous responsibility to care for collections that are held, especially in public museums. So I won't read you the whole document, not to bore you to death. But there are a few things that I do want to highlight. Is that every conservator in the organization really pledges that their work is governed by informed respect for the cultural property, for its unique character and significance, and for the people and persons who created it. That we document all of the work that we do, which is also part of what Jenn helps to take care of and make sure that we don't lose any of the documentation for artworks. That we act with honesty and respect in all of our professional relationships and recognize that there's specialized knowledge outside of conservation. And really finally, that we promote an awareness and understanding of the work that we do to the wider public, which is why I was very excited that Joy asked us to speak today.
Well, I'm really excited to have you both here. And do we have some feedback maybe? Okay. And so it's really nice to have you both here and to talk about your roles at the museum. And you've kind of mentioned this question already about how your roles intersect with one another, but I wanted to know if you wanted to add to that, how your roles intersect, how you work with each other in the museum.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention that Greg and I and the entire collections management team and the entire conservation, really everyone that works at the museum, we're responsible for caring for upwards of 36,000 objects which belong to the city of Baltimore and the Walters Art Museum. So that's a huge number. So we have a lot of systems in place to take care of all this stuff because we can't possibly be working with every single object all the time. The collection consists of sculpture, furniture, paintings, metals, textiles, objects, manuscripts and rare books, among other things. So we have a lot of different places and types of storage that we have to take care of in order to best suit the objects.
So one of the
great
ways,
example.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of the ways that we work together very closely. And we also work with our facilities and operations department is to monitor the environment within the museum in terms of temperature, relative humidity, light levels, as well as with inside cases to protect very delicate artworks. Also physical organization of storage, not only so we don't drive ourselves crazy trying to find something, but so that things aren't accidentally damaged. And this kind of preventive work is very important because it helps to preserve the collection for future generations, but it might not be so visible if you visit the museum either online or in person. It's sort of humming along in the background. But that's one of the most important ways that we work together.
I call it the Beltway Project because due to just regular degradation of archival materials, we have special kinds of tissue paper and blue board, cardboard stock, things like that that we use to safely house each of the objects, but they all start to degrade after a couple of decades. And so by the time, with 36,000 objects, by the time we've rehoused one part of the collection, it's time to do the next part again. So Greg and I really liaise with each other in terms of, is an object fragile? If so, what part of it is? Is it the whole thing? How should we house it so that it can be picked up and transported safely? Because objects often, someone wants to photograph it, or it's been requested for a loan to another museum for a big exhibition, or many different other versions of potential situations where Greg and I have to figure out together what are the logistics and needs for this object to travel if it possibly can.
And that's, you might have seen in the slides here some artworks that are crated and actually braced into padded structures. And that's another thing that we cooperate with each other and work very closely with our exhibitions and installations team who actually build many of those crates to make sure that our artwork is safe in storage and also when it travels to other institutions as well.
Yeah, and one team that we haven't mentioned but is so integral to all of our work are the art handlers and our preparators. It's sort of the same term for different term for same things. They are also working with each of us daily to bring things and take things and make sure that all of the objects are safely moving to and fro.
I really appreciate you all kind of indicating and kind of codifying what the roles are. I think it's important for people to know that, you know, there's a lot of front end staff. We love our visitor services, curatorial programs, but there's so many people working behind the scenes to really make sure that the artwork is safe and that we can show it, display it, and have programming around said objects. It's really important. And so that the objects themselves can kind of see the world as well, right? Through a lot of the shipping and storage related needs for the object. My next question is, when does an object become a work of art? I know that this might be a contentious subject throughout the entire museum world, right? And I'm asking you to tackle it right now. Not exactly, but I'm just curious your
30 seconds?
Yeah, 3 seconds.
Well, I think you're right. It is, you know, people write books, hold contentious conferences, have wrote PhD theses about this. But in a nutshell, at least from my perspective, it's about negotiating what is of cultural value. And we think of auction houses and collectors and art historians and archaeologists who write books and organize exhibitions. But a large part of that sort of cultural value negotiation is also popular culture. So books and movies and TV and music and things that we might not think of immediately. And museums are certainly a very important part of that kind of negotiated value because they are so visible and so public. And I think that, you know, given our own professional roles and our ethical guidelines, we can speak to how our own museum negotiates that process, but it's worth pointing out that in the wider world, it's much more complex and it changes over time. That the network of one group of people, group of institutions that can negotiate cultural value in one place and one time might not be the same at another place or another time.
Yeah.
So Jen, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, I want to just also, obviously this is a deeply personal and complicated question, but I want to talk about a little bit in terms of the Walters Art Museum's collecting. When we decide to bring an object into the collection, in other words, accession it, we are doing that. Part of that accessioning is a promise that we're making to the city of Baltimore and to our public, our community, to care for that artwork in perpetuity forever. And so if we decide that we can't bring an artwork into the collection, it really is not a comment on whether or not that piece of that object, that piece of art is actually good art, not good art, whatever. Maybe there's nothing like good, bad art, sorry. But it's really an issue of whether or not we have the resources, the staff, the space to care for this object until the end of time, which is the goal.
Yeah. So in our particular roles, and mine especially, we have to think about issues like how fragile something is, or how damaged or deteriorated it is, or whether it's authentic, whether it is indeed what it purports to be. If there's space for it, and I know, Jen, you spend a lot of time thinking about space and storage and in our exhibition spaces as well. So there are logistical issues that really we, in our very specifically defined professional roles, have to think about in terms of collecting practices.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys speaking to that nuance because it does depend on the institution, right? Whether it's a museum, historical society, other entity that wants to collect work. And these are questions that don't just come up in historic collections, but also in contemporary collections as well, as far as material, its condition, and just assessing that from space to space. So I really appreciate you tackling that very difficult question today. I wanted to move on to some awesome artwork that we have in our collection. This is the Adam and Eve, and I know that this might be very familiar to some Walters visitors, as it sits kind of prominently in the Walters space. And I was wondering, what's the deal with this piece? I think a lot of people have a lot of questions around its placement, where it comes from, and I feel I'm in in the right position, in the right time, in the right place with the right people to ask that question.
So I suppose I can start off. You might have noticed in the slides that you saw me working on a portion of it. So I, in my role as a conservator, spent quite a while in the recent past cleaning the surfaces, documenting it, retouching prior restorations that were obscuring original portions of the artwork. And as you mentioned, it's in a very prominent position. It was made in what we believe to be Florence, probably around 1515, by the third generation of the della Robbia workshops, but we don't actually have any certain information about where it was for the first 350 years of its life or so. You can see that list of names, dates, and places there at the bottom, and that's what we call the provenance of the object. So it was purchased by Henry Walters, a member of the Walters family, in 1902. And we know a little bit about where it came from before then, but not too much. So we're still hoping to piece together some of the history. And again, that's part of the work that I do with my curatorial colleagues and through scientific analysis as well. So if we can flip to the next slide. One piece of interesting documentation that we do have is this diagram. So you can see that it's actually in pieces, and it was originally made in pieces, and it's made out of ceramic, a kind of low-fired ceramic like a terracotta flower pot that's covered with colorful glazes. And it was actually taken apart and shipped first to New York from Paris and then to Baltimore. And it's been in the building, in that same building on Charles Street since 1908. So many, many generations of people in Baltimore have had a chance to see it. And now we know a little bit more about its fragile physical structure and its history. And we're able to share that with folks through information in the galleries and through programs like this.
And Greg, it's something like 9 feet tall.
Right. We should point out that this is not, it looks tiny on the screen. Yeah, it's 9 feet. It's a little more than 9 feet tall and 6.5 feet wide, and it's halfway up a flight of stairs.
Yes. So this diagram is hugely useful for all of us because if, God forbid, we ever had to disassemble it for any reason, this is how we would want to document taking it apart and putting it back together.
And I will also point out that in my work, I actually updated this because there are new pieces that are broken. So it's actually in many more pieces, but we have a diagram of that as well now too.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find fascinating that maybe you all alluded to is that this diagram itself is its own artifact. And I think it's quite interesting, like how it plays its own role as an art object or as an archival object. And then of course, its importance to the piece itself. So I think that's so cool. And hopefully the audience does too.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason that the documentation is so important to my job and museums as a whole is because you find some richness there that without these old documents, we would never have even been able to imagine.
And it provides the context, especially for these older artworks that were acquired by the Walters family and then donated all at once to the city. It provides the context for that provenance of where did this come from, and helps us to begin to piece together these richer stories of where it was made, how it was made, and how it's changed over time.
Yeah, so I talked about how we have 36,000 and change objects in the collection, and about 22,000 of those were the original Walters bequest. When Henry Walters died in 1931, he bequeathed his entire collection to the city of Baltimore and to the public. So since then, we have added on to it now at 36 and change.
That's a lot. And it's also, it's really interesting for those that might not know about like how the base collecting base, I guess, I do not know the technical term, but the kind of like base collection of the Walters and how it was kind of built from there. It's really interesting that this fell into that base collection. And kind of the tastes and choices of the day to kind of preserve those things. I won't make any value judgments today, but I just think it's really interesting and fascinating that we can kind of look at this piece in particular that, again, is very prominent, and it can tell that story.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the Walters, Henry and William, father and son, the Walters, the original Walters, they collected in lots of different ways. Sometimes it was a one-off. They really wanted a certain work of art. And sometimes they bought things in giant batches and just kind of had them shipped, and then people sorted it out later.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. A fun fact for trivia, for sure. I wanted to move on to another piece. It's a little bit different, but maybe a little bit the same. And this is Robert Lugo's sculpture, Kick in the Doorway. When we're discussing collections care, what makes this artwork different than the Adam and Eve that we just saw?
In terms of care, it's in pieces that are actually meant to be separate. So that's a huge and good thing, because each piece is quite heavy on its own. But really it came into the collection just at very different times. You know, this was just recently commissioned for the reopening of our historic house at 1 West Mount Vernon Place. And so the Walters actually worked with the artist Rob Lugo to create something for the mantle in the dining room of the house. And so after much discussion, this is what then I got to organize the packing and shipping safely from Philadelphia, where his studio is, to get it to the museum and to install it with him.
And I will also point out that you might see in that list of materials there that this is a very similar material. This is, again, the same type of ceramic, terracotta, with glaze on the surfaces, using many of the same different techniques. So parts of it are made with a mold, parts of it are freehand modeled and sculpted, and then it's glazed overall. And you might be able to see that there are some certainly stylistic similarities as well. But what was really wonderful for me, looking at it, from a materials perspective, is that this shares a lot in terms of artistry with the Adam and Eve, which was made 500 years ago, thousands of miles away. And this is also very, very large. This is about 5 feet tall overall. So,
and the bust is life size. The bust is
life size, yeah. So again, this really sculptural form that's pushing the limits of what you can do with ceramics. So many of the same kind of subtle flaws and repairs during manufacture show up on this object as on the Adam and Eve. So there's this amazing kind of continuity and play with the material as well.
That's wonderful. And I appreciate you kind of indicating kind of some of the similarities as well. And I'm curious, as we move through images of Kick in the Doorway, if you guys could describe why it's important to both of you about bringing new accessions to the museum, and what is important when you bring in those new accessions?
Right. Well, from my point of view as the head of collections management, we really need to know every last bit of information that we can possibly know about the condition, so that we know how it needs to be packed and shipped and treated once it's here, housed, and about the provenance, about where it came from and where it's been, so that we can make sure that everything is above board and legal.
And so we aren't left trying to piece together from packing slips and diagrams where this came from. Typically, new accessions, new artworks to the collection are proposed by our curatorial team, who submit a report to our board of trustees about how they feel it improves or fits into the collection. And then each of our departments, so collections care and conservation, are asked to submit a short report on our own sort of views of how this will fit into the collection as well. So as I was talking about materials and condition, we are often asked to evaluate, how fragile is this? How much care and conservation will it require now or in the future? Do we have the ability to safely display this? And then also we're talking about big things, big fragile things. Can we store these safely? So that's really in terms of our own kind of limited professional roles in that process, how we contribute to building the collection. Jen, do you have more to add?
No, just that your point about where are we going to put this is very important, because, you know, we know that something's going to come into the building or into the collection for a specific project, and it's going to shine and be so perfect for that project. If we are then also going to own it afterwards, it's really important to think down the line. In 20 years, where are we putting this? When that gallery is reinstalled, do we have space to store this?
And I think it's really good that you touched on that, right? Because that's like a tenet for collections management, is like the storage and where space is, and constantly, like Greg said earlier, assessing what space is. And kind of it seems very philosophical about like, what is space? How do we store? What are those things? So I think it's really important that, and exciting to hear from you all, that you stick to your guns and you're really thinking about the object, right? Because the object cannot speak for itself.
Yeah, and I know somewhere in here we have a question about access, and this is just like really jogging that for me, because part of my contribution and my department's contribution to access is making sure that we can get to things and that we can properly store things with enough space around them that we can get to them. Because when a scholar comes and wants to see a certain object, we need to not only know where it is and be able to bring it out to help them with their research, but it needs to be easy to do so that we can do as much of that as our schedules allow. And if it's behind 5 other things that are also huge because we didn't have anywhere to put them, that decreases access and isn't, you know, what I think that collections management is all about.
Yeah, and let's hop into that. Why is access important to you all in general, beyond just like the space constraints, but just in general for your roles?
Well, in my own role in preserving and conserving the collection for today, for tomorrow, for 100 years from now, access means not only the access to the artworks in terms of display and loan and in storage, but also access to the physical spaces of the museum and access to the information that we hold. Because we've been talking about documentation, there are huge amounts of information, photographs, diagrams, written reports, other things, as we're talking about provenance, that are really important to understanding the meaning of the collection, to reinterpreting the collection, to contextualizing the collection. And so access is, I think, an organizing principle for any institution that's free and public. And I've chosen throughout my career to work for free public museums because I think that that's enormously important. But within our roles, we're sort of caught in this bind that we want as much access as possible because it's something that is philosophically and ethically important, as I pointed out in our code of ethics before. But we also have to think about balancing that with the needs for preservation. That for certain very fragile artworks, say something that's very light sensitive, like a watercolor, if we put it on view continuously in front of a window so that people walking by on the street could see it, we risk fading it so that no one in the future can access it or meaningfully interact with it. So we do often have to negotiate with curatorial staff, amongst ourselves, with lending institutions or borrowing institutions who want artworks from the collection to display, about how we balance those issues of maximum access with also preservation for the future, which is tricky.
Yeah. So I just want to take this opportunity to plug art.thewalters.org, which is where 40% of our collection is actually digitized and online, including provenance information. So anyone, it's fun to just poke around a little bit. There's so much on there, and we're always trying to add to it. That's part of our well.
And one of the major initiatives that has recently kind of come to fruition is digitizing many of our manuscripts, including some of our most important medieval manuscripts and really beautiful Art Nouveau manuscripts, which means you can page through them just like a book, which is, I think, a really wonderful open access initiative, and I'm grateful that has now been made public.
Yeah, thank you for plugging those things. They're really cool, especially, but even just knowing we get to see some things that are not on view through art.thewalters.org. So I'm just going to plug it again. And I see that Sydney has put it here for us too. So yeah, you should go and check it out because there's just so many opportunities to explore so many areas of our collection, especially since we're currently not open. So you can kind of take a glimpse in that way. My last question for you all, and I think it's one of the more important questions, and you guys have been alluding to this throughout the whole program, and that is, what is the kind of personal work vision or the personal vision for your work? Tough question.
I'll go first. It is a really tough question. I think document, and kind of chaos into order. So that is our goal as registrars and collection specialists, is to, in 20 years, in 50 years, in 200 years, when I'm not around anymore, I want a layperson to be able to come in and figure out my system, our record keeping, so that they can know what they're looking at. And that's really the most important thing, is that we are keeping these things for perpetuity in the best possible shape that they can.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, that is a really complicated question, because I feel like I could have talked this whole time about that. But certainly the ability to really work with and for the public trust, I think, is important to me personally. And I think important to any public institution like the Walters, that access, transparency are extraordinarily important. And that within my professional organization, having these really kind of thorny philosophical and ethical debates about the work that we do, which is really, really very much in the public trust, is something that's very important to me, and something that I'm committed to continually educating myself about. And part of what drew me to the Walters initially was that it has a staff that is very committed to having those difficult conversations amongst ourselves. And it has historically been very active in our professional organizations as well.
That's beautiful, you all. Sharing a piece of your own personal philosophy, I think, is quite astounding. And I think you've also, just through this documentation process, Jen and Greg, you've shown us kind of like a really good glimpse of what happens before the artwork is put up, and also maybe even when it's currently in view, and kind of how you all are thinking about those objects, even though they might seem stationary and static, they are kind of like alive in your minds in a way. And they continue to be. And of course, we just showed two of so many other objects that you all work on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. And so I just want to plug art.thewalters.org one more time for folks to check that out and see so many other objects that we have in our collection. I want to thank you both for being here. Thank you so much to Greg and Jen for being here and sharing their work and also their philosophy with us. I want to thank our digital team for putting this all together and making this happen. We all exist here in this space, this digital space, because of them. And I want to thank our audience. Thank you so much for being here and sharing with us, or going along for the ride with us. And we'll see you in the next program. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Bye.